Okay, I'm live. I don't think there's anybody here yet. Somebody just checked in. Somebody else. Okay, it's going to be starting in about 10 minutes. Greetings. Greetings to the UK. Getting a few more people. Good. Getting ready to start in a few minutes. Let me know if the audio is okay. Good. Okay. So we're not doing no technical problems this time. Okay. 7 minutes to go. We have 10 people in the room. Greetings, Wa. Okay, less than 5 minutes to go. Good evening. Few minutes yet. Start as usual right on the dot of 6. In a couple of minutes. The light keeps changing because I think I've got the window open and the sun is kind of half cloudy today, so the sun's in and out. Okay, got a few more people popping in. Just about starting time. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, so welcome to this week's live stream, and today I'm going to be talking about the first factor of the Eightfold Path, samadhi, right view. It's put at the very head of the Eightfold Path for a reason. It's very important as a foundation for everything else that we do in our practice. That we have a proper view. So first, we have to understand what is meant by ditthi, or view. And in this case, very often I'm critical of common translations, but I think view is very apropos for ditthi, because like ditthi, the English word view has a kind of double meaning. It can be a view in terms of the object of the eye sense, like the view out your window, or you're viewing a movie, right? This is a view as object of eye sense, and ditthi can be used in that sense in the Pali. But it also, and in the case of samadhi, right view, it's used in a more philosophical sense. And a view is a way of holding an understanding of the world. It's different than an opinion or a belief. These things arise out of view. View is more fundamental. It's perhaps somewhat closest to the term in a German word that occurs in Western philosophy, Weltanschauung, worldview. How you're holding your understanding of the world. So you're sort of your base assumptions, your underlying sense of things. Well, and in terms of Buddhist practice, we first of all need to distinguish between right view and wrong view, samadhi, micchaditthi. And we also have to discuss the proper holding of a view, because this is also very important. And I'll get to that in a little bit later, but just to say initially that the holding a view is not like having a dogmatic belief in a set of ideas, and that becomes then clinging to views, which is and one of the defilements. It's one of the forms of upadana. So first of all, distinguish samadhi from micchaditthi. And samadhi is defined in with different formulas in different places in the Pali Canon. One common formula states it all in terms of karma and rebirth. There is this world and the other world. There is the fruit of good and evil deeds, and so forth. And this is sometimes referred to as the conventional right view, or the mundane or the lower right view. And the higher right view is the Noble Eightfold, or the Four Noble Truths, is a basis. The Four Noble Truths is a basis for right view. Also, seeing the three characteristics, seeing things in terms of um, imperfection or suffering, impermanence, and emptiness or not self. These are all aspects of right view. And this is um, distinguished or separated from wrong view, michidiki. And mich is quite a harsh word, actually. It's like more than just wrong. It's like twisted or perverted. It's a view that's harmful to hold. And the Brahmajala Sutta, for example, gives this is the first sutta of the Digha Nikaya. It gives a long list, 61 kinds of wrong view, and discusses it, in some cases how they arise and what they're based on. And when at first looking at this list of 61 views, it can seem rather arbitrary. But there's a very interesting book written by a Sri Lankan scholar, Jantaleka, Early Buddhist View of Knowledge, which includes some other stuff, but it's the longest section in the book is dealing with the Brahmajala Sutta and the 61 views, and he identifies most of them with known schools of thought that existed in India. So they weren't just arbitrarily chosen to fill out a matrix. The Buddha was actually critiquing existing philosophies. But we don't need actually to go through the 61 views because it can be simplified, and in other places it is. The wrong views generally fall into two broad categories, and there's one kind of outlier. The two broad categories are eternalism and annihilationism, Sasadawada and Uchedawada. And these views existed in various formulations in India, and they still exist in different formulations today. And most people who are not familiar with the Buddhist teachings would think that these two views compromise the total possible ways of holding the world and understanding the world. The eternalist view, Sasadawada, has as its core principle the idea that there is some unchanging eternal principle that continues on from life to life. This is the Atman, or the Jiva, or in modern terms, the soul or the spirit. There's some essence in a human being that doesn't change, that continues on after death, some particular destiny. This eternalist view usually, maybe not always, but almost always, also includes the idea of a creator God, that there is an eternal, omniscient, omnipotent being who created the universe as the first instance of causality, the first cause. So we see that view had variations in ancient India, usually associated with the god being Brahma, sometimes Pachapati, but in any case, is some all-powerful creator being, and it's usually associated in the Indian versions with reincarnation from life to life. In the West, and in later times, the theistic religions arose that, like Christianity, Islam, that hold this eternalist principle. And there's all kind of variations. We know there's many different sects of Christianity, for example, with different nuances on this idea, but they all have this fundamental idea of a eternal life and a creator God. Now, it's interesting in the Brahmajala Sutta, the Buddha actually discusses how theistic religions arise in the first place. What happens in the beginning of a new cycle, and you must understand that in the Buddhist cosmology, there's no sense of an ultimate beginning, but there is a beginning and an ending of a particular world system. This world system we live in came into being at some point and will pass out of being at some point, but there will always be and always have been world systems. That's the idea. So when a new world system comes into being, it's populated from the top down. The beings are reborn first in the higher realms, and then gradually the lower realms become populated. So at some point, by the force of his previous karma from the last world system, some being will appear in the Brahma world, and he's the first one to appear in that world. And he spends a long time there alone, and he begins to wish for companions. And then at some later time, by the force of their own karma, more beings start appearing in that world, lesser Brahmas. And he believes that he has created them by the force of his wish. And he explains and teaches that to them, and they believe it as well. And they believe he is the creator. He created them. And he's the all-creator. Eventually, the lifespan of one of these lesser Brahmas expires, and they fall from that realm, and they're reborn in the human world. And if they become a yogi in the human world and practice austerities or meditation, and they develop psychic powers remembering past lives, they see visions of this Brahma world and the great Brahma teaching them about how he created them. And they see this as a vision of the creator God and of heaven, and they teach it to others. And this is the account in the Brahmajala Sutta of how theistic religions begin. The opposite set of Michadiki, or wrong views, are Chetawada, or annihilationism. This set of views holds that human beings at death are completely terminated. There's no continuity of any kind after death. The elements are dispersed. And that's the end of it. And there are variations on this view as well. It seemed to be a minority position in ancient India. It didn't seem to really be very numerous or strongly held. But there were schools teaching this. And as we know, in modern times, it's a very prominent view. It seems to be the preferred view now of the intellectual classes. And in modern terms, we would call it materialism or physicalism. This holds the idea that only the material world is real, and that the mind is nothing more than a reaction in the brain. It's nothing more than a process of the brain. One phrase that some modern person of this persuasion used is that The brain secretes thoughts like the liver secretes bile. Uh, so, in this view, human beings are basically just machines made out of meat, and that's all there is to it. Now, in other suttas, the Buddha simplifies the Brahmajala formula and uh, specifies these two as the extreme views. And this would include most of the ones in the 61 of the Brahmajala, the view of eternalism and the view of annihilationism. And he specifies his own view as the middle path between the two. From the view of the world, these two extreme views are inveterate opponents, and we see that playing out, in modern debates about things like creationism versus evolutionism and theism versus atheism. It seems like these two are completely irreconcilable, and in most instances they are. However, from the Buddhist point of view, in the middle, although these two seem like a totally, completely opposite, they do share one characteristic that makes them wrong view from the Buddhist point of understanding, is that they, at some point, deny causality. And I think this is very critical. It seems to be an underlying principle, an axiom of Buddhist thought through the ages, that of universal causality. The statement is found in Abhidhamma texts that everything arises from causes and conditions. Everything, and elsewhere it says everything arises from a cause and nothing arises from a single cause. So this is a denial of randomness or arbitrariness. And this is the philosophical reason why we generally think of the universe as being without a beginning. The Buddha himself didn't comment on that, and he wouldn't comment on that. He said the origin of the universe is something not to be considered, could never be known, but he never specified whether it had a beginning or not. But later, Buddhist thinkers and teachers almost always held that the universe was without a beginning. And this is stated explicitly in the commentaries as early as that. And it's a logical conclusion from the idea of universal causality. If everything arises from a cause, then there can never be a first cause. No matter how far back in time you go, there's always going to be a previous moment that was the predecessor and proximate cause of the next moment. Nothing arises without a cause, so there can never be a beginning. Now, as I said, that this principle of causality breaks down in either the eternalist or the annihilationist view. In the eternalist view, they can be very. Some thinkers in Christian or Islamic theology will be very methodical and scientific generally, but if you go back to the ultimate cause of everything, it has to be God. And God is the first cause. It's the beginning of things, is the will of creation by God. So that's essentially an arbitrary act. God had no cause, and his will arose just by his own desire. It didn't arise from any previous cause. So there's a breakdown in causality in the arbitrary will of the creator. In the annihilationist view, in the end, it falls back on randomness, or not arbitrariness, but randomness. That there are some things that they're just so. That's just how they are. They have no cause or reason. And this is most clearly evidenced in the the particular state of birth of different beings. Some of us, some beings are born human and some are born animals. And even within the human realm, there is a wide range. There can be someone born as a genius or with the capacity to be a star athlete, and somebody else is born with Down syndrome or some other debilitating birth defect. Modern science can go some distance in understanding the mechanics of how that occurs in terms of genetics, but it can never answer the question why. Why was this person born as a child prodigy and this one born with Down syndrome? And the only answer that materialism can have for that is just randomness. It just happened. It's just a luck of the draw. An atomic particle just happened to scramble the genes of his mother and cause him to be born badly. So this is not satisfactory in terms of causality, whereas the view of karma and rebirth explains that as the conditions were set by their previous lifetimes. And this is then there's no break in causality. And this principle of causality also necessitates the truth of rebirth, because otherwise the first consciousness moment in a new life would be without cause. It would appear from nowhere without a cause. So the Buddhist view in the middle is based on this principle of causality. And this is detailed and explicated in the dependent origination, the Paticca Samuppada, which the Buddha identifies in several places as being the middle view. So we have these two extremes, and we have the Buddhist view in the middle. And in some ways, this middle path view is like a razor edge. And you can see in Buddhist history of the different schools and traditions, and in different teachers that exist at the present time, you can see often a slight deviation of falling away either towards eternalism or annihilationism. It's challenging to maintain that pure middle position. There is one modern Buddhist writer, Maurice Welsh, who many of you might recognize as a translator of the Digha Nikaya. In an essay he wrote about the view, he came up with a very evocative and charming kind of imagery, an analogy. He said it's like you have a round circular lake, and there's an island in the dead center of the lake. And there's kind of an optical illusion, whichever side of the lake you stand on, that island will appear to be closer to the far shore. And he says that's the way it is with the views. Someone on the shore of annihilationism, materialist, looking at Buddhism in the middle, they see it as being close to the eternalist position. They say, well, I believe in rebirth. They have an idea of these mystical ideas of emptiness and so on. There's no, they're not that different from all the other religions. But if you walk around the lake and stand on the eternalist shore with the Christian theologians, and you look at the lake, at the island in the middle of the lake, it appears to be close to the far shore of materialism. So, well, these Buddhists don't believe in God. They don't believe in eternal soul. No, they're really just slightly different than the materialists and the atheists. And I think we can see that in critiques. If you look at critiques of Buddhism, written either by materialists or by theists, you'll see that this attitude. So the middle path view is one that sees the world in terms of causes and conditions, that holds the principle of karma and rebirth as a necessary adjunct to that, and holds to the idea of the Four Noble Truths and three characteristics as underlying principles. These things compromise what could be termed right view or samadhi. And I did mention, I'll go back to a point that I kind of glossed over earlier. Leave it to the end of this section. I said that in the Brahmajala Sutta there are two main categories. We dealt with Eternalism and annihilationism, and there's a third category that doesn't really fit either one, that the Buddha calls the eel-wrigglers. This is a literal translation from the Pali, the eel-wrigglers view. And he's actually very contemptuous of the eel-wrigglers. And the description of their view sounds like a satire or a parody. It's just, if they're asked a question, they'll say, well, I won't say yes and I won't say no. If I said yes, you might think that I believed it. And if I said no, you might think I didn't believe it. And it goes on and on in different permutations. In the end, it's said that the holding of the eel-wrigglers view, they refuse to commit to anything. And the view arises out of stupidity or cowardice. So this is eel-wriggler is very close to modern agnosticism. So, anyone who holds that, which I have seen people try to make the case that Buddhism is basically agnostic. That's not at all the case. Now, that was in summary, that was a description of right view in contrast to wrong view. But the other aspect I want to cover in this talk is very important, is the correct holding of view. And the Buddha was very definitely against dogmatic adherence to views. And he said, even this own teaching of mine, if it's held wrongly, it becomes a source of quarreling and dispute and suffering. So even if you're right, you shouldn't make it a point of dispute and argument and disparagement of others. And also in general, we should have some humility to understand that we don't understand everything, we don't know everything, and we should have an open mind that we could be wrong about something, and to hold our views lightly. And the Buddha tells a couple of parables about this to illustrate this point, particularly of attachment of views, which is a very pernicious defilement, to be uh, dogmatically attached to a view, whether it's a spiritual view or a political one or any opinion whatsoever. If it's held dogmatically and one refuses to consider the possibility that it might be an error, then it becomes a defilement or a hindrance. In one of these parables, the story is about a couple of friends left their home village to go on a journey, and when they come back, they pass through a village that had been abandoned, perhaps because of a bandit attack or some other reason, but they found an abandoned village. And as they're passing through the village, they come across one place a pile of straw, and they say, "Oh, we got some straw here. It's good. It's fresh. It'll be useful. Take it home and we'll feed our animals with it. It'll be handy to have." And so they make bundles out of the straw and put them on their heads in the Indian fashion and continue walking. And a little bit later, they come across some bundles of cloth. And the one fellow says, "Oh, this cloth is much better, more valuable than straw. I'm going to throw my straw away so I have room to carry a bundle of cloth." But the other fellow says, "Well, I would take the cloth, but I've carried this straw already for a ways, and I'm kind of ashamed to throw it away now." "Oh, okay, suit yourself." And as they go through the village, they come across one thing after another more valuable than the last, until at the end it's bars of gold and then bags of jewels. And the further they part with it, they become more and more attached to it. So they get back to their home village, and the one fellow has bags of jewels, and he's rich for the rest of his life, and the other fellow has some straw to feed his cow for a day. So the interesting thing, and this is related to the Buddha, particularly to the idea of attachment of views. And the interesting thing about this is the Buddha said that guy was correct who came back with the bag of jewels. He didn't say you should come back with an empty head, not carrying any of the findings. So what this means is that it's not wrong to have an opinion or a belief about something, but you should hold it lightly. And if you find that it's wrong, if you find it's refuted in some way, or there's a better, more clear understanding presented to you, you say, "Oh, okay," and you drop your old view and take up a new one. And you should be able to do that readily. I think it's one of the biggest problems in the world today that causes a lot of strife is attachment of views and holding on dogmatically to thinking you're right. But one little practice that I think is very useful, if you find yourself in a disagreement with somebody, and you're even just a friendly disagreement, or even more so an argument or dispute about some point of view, whether it's to do with religion or politics or entertainment or anything else, try and pause mentally at some point in your dispute and ask yourself, why am I holding on to this view? And it may be, and often is, simply an ego position. You don't want to look like a fool and admit you're wrong. that's of no value. But sometimes you look at the two views and rationally and say, well, this view that I hold actually, I think it is correct. And, it's worth holding on to. I heard a kind of amusing story once about this is like a second person story that I heard. It was two friends who were practitioners of Dhamma, and they got into some dispute that got a little bit heated about some esoteric point of Buddhist philosophy, and they parted their ways without reconciling their positions. And they didn't see each other for a while. And in the meantime, both of them went on a journey. They went on a long journey. And one went east and one went west, from Canada. And one, went across the ocean, across Europe and into Asia. And the other one went into, I think he went to Thailand first, and then he kept traveling west. They ended up meeting in India, by chance in a coffee shop in some town in India. And their conversation eventually turned to this point of Dhamma that they disputed. And again, the argument became heated. But then they suddenly realized that they were taking the opposite sides from what they had originally. They crossed around half the planet and met in a coffee shop in India and continued their argument from the opposite side. So I thought that was quite amusing when I heard that. It's an example of attachment of views that sometimes we don't even realize we're attached to the view, let alone why we're attached to it. So there's a value in being open-minded and open to fresh experience and fresh knowledge. One thing I like to say in this regard is, in terms of understanding of some point of Dhamma, we should never be satisfied that we fully understand anything. And this is a kind of a danger of intellectualism, that if you do a lot of study and reading and listening, you think, oh, I figured this out. I know this particular thing. And so then what you do mentally is you roll it up and put it away in a cubbyhole in your mind, and that's done. So you've blocked any further growth or exploration in that area because you think it's done. But if you keep the mind completely open and ready to see new angles, new perspectives, new dimensions to even things you thought you understood, then you're opening yourself for further spiritual growth and widening and broadening your wisdom faculty. So I think I'll stop there and go to answering questions from the chat. If anybody has questions, please type them into the chat, and I'll stay on for a while longer, as long as there's questions coming in. I'm not seeing any questions, so maybe it was all so clear, well expressed, that nobody has any doubts or need for clarification. Okay, we'll get to something now. I heard some Ajahns speak that the eternal is right view. No, that's That's not. If you have heard that and that's not correct. There, like I said, I mentioned in the talk that there's always the possibility of sliding into eternalism or annihilationism, and there have been Buddhist schools and particular traditions that fall off one way or the other. But if anybody says that uh, the eternal is the right view, they're wrong. There's a story in the suttas about it involves a Mara. There's a follower of the Buddha who a layman who became a stream enterer, and Mara was concerned this fellow was making too much progress. He wanted to thwart his progress. And Mara came to his door and assumed the form of the Buddha. So it looked like the Buddha was there. And he told the fellow, yesterday when I was teaching, I made a mistake and I had felt I need to correct it for you today. I said that there's nothing to be found in any of the five khandhas that's eternal, everlasting. But I was wrong. There is one thing. And the first the fellow believed that this was the Buddha. He said, "Oh, thank you, Venerable Sir." But then he goes back home and into his house and starts thinking about it. And he thinks, "Well, I don't think the Buddha. First of all, I don't think he'd make a mistake. In the second place, it doesn't sound like the Buddha's teaching that there's some one thing that's eternal. That must have been Mara." So, and then later he cleared that up with the Buddha, but he had deduced on his own that it was Mara. Is high IQ a sign of good karma? Yes. Yes, intelligence is said to be the karmic result of taking an interest in the Dhamma and asking questions and studying the Dhamma in previous lifetimes when one is born with a good intelligence. The mind. No, the mind is even more impermanent than the body, according to the Buddha. He said that and someone who holds that doesn't see the impermanence of the body, and someone who doesn't see the impermanence of the mind, the person who doesn't see the impermanence of the mind is 16 times more foolish, because a mind moment is 16 times briefer than a physical moment, so it's even more impermanent. I would be curious, what ajahn are you talking about that said that the mind is eternal? Could one consider bhavatana condition be conditioned by eternalist views? Somebody read bhavatana and materialism? Yes, I think so. I think bhavatana is associated with eternalism and vibhavatana with materialism. There's also, it's said in one place that not seeing the beginning of dhammas leads to materialism, and not seeing their ending leads to eternalism. Is middle way also part of the right view regarding indulgence and austerity? Yes, that was actually the first use the Buddha made of the term. He uses middle way or middle path in a few different contexts. And the very first one was in terms of practice, to avoid the extremes of hedonism and self-mortification. Ajahn Suchard, I'm not sure, I don't know who he is, I'll have to look into that. Is there free will? That's not a simple question to answer. There's levels to that. There is free will, but there's no willer. There's no one. The Chaitanya is a factor, and that is will or volition. And in the Abhidhamma, there's the Jalana moments, that when karma is made, and there's a freedom there, but you can't push that to the extent of then believing in a person or self that's making the decision. What are some signs you are making progress in Vipassana? You necessarily need to see bright lights. No. If you're seeing phenomena, if you're doing Vipassana meditation and you're seeing phenomena like bright lights, that is actually classed as a corruption of insight, because these sorts of phenomena arise more associated with samadhi, and if the mind is trying to do insight, these things arise. It is a stage that you go through, but you need to recognize this is just a phenomena. It's not important. It's not real. It's impermanent, like everything else, and you'll pass through it quickly. It's not actually beneficial. It is a sign of some development of samadhi, that your meditation has reached a certain stage, but it's not in itself beneficial. And the danger is that people become attached to these phenomena. They think it's wonderful, and they can be very pleasant and interesting, and you get stuck there. You need to see it as just another empty phenomena and pass through. What can be said about right view in relation to social anxiety? I would say that social anxiety arises from an attachment to the self, the self position, and a wish to protect the self. And if you see the self as empty and just a process of cause and condition, and the same applies to the other people in the situation, then you just can carry on without any concern or anxiety. But if you feel that you need to uphold your position, and you feel a self that needs to be protected and enhanced, and you don't want to see it insulted or humiliated, and you feel you need to protect it, then you're going to have anxiety. Would arahants after death still have mind? That's exactly one of the unanswerable questions that the Buddha was asked by a wanderer. Does the Tathagata exist after death? The Tathagata being a fully enlightened person, so equivalent of an arahant. Does the Tathagata exist after death? And the Buddha said, no, that doesn't fit the case. Well, does he not exist? No, that also does not fit the case. Does he both exist and not exist? No, it does not fit the case. Does he neither exist nor not exist? Does not fit the case. And this is a specific formula that occurs in different contexts in different ways, that comes from the Indian system of logic. In the West, Greeks developed binary logic, either or, either A or not A. But in India, they have two but four poles of answer to a logical question. A, not A, both A and not A, neither A nor not A. So the Buddha was, as he often did, he was referencing something very specific from the culture. So what he was saying was that understanding what happens to an enlightened being after death is not something we can talk about, because it doesn't fit into any of our logical categories. So it's not a question that's even meaningful. I've noticed that some sects of Buddhism appear to have been hijacked by left-wing politics, similar to right-wing policy in Christian churches. Are they both wrong view? Well, there's certainly both attachment to views. Yeah, I've seen the same thing, and it is problematic that uh, people imagine, they confuse their religious or spiritual position with a political view that they hold, and it works. It works, on all sides. And, in Asia, in Sri Lanka particularly, there've been, and Burma too, in Thailand to some degree, there've been very right wing Buddhist spokesmen. Um, but I know, yeah, in the West, in contemporary times, a lot of the Buddhist uh, groups that exist now very much seem to be uh, adhering to extreme left-wing views and promulgating them. And I think in their own mind, they think that's the Buddha Dharma. Why Buddha deliberately was not answering some questions like those and remained silent? Uh, yeah, there's different reasons for it. There's like a list of 14 Avyakata Dhammas, or unanswerable questions. And some of them, like the one I talked about, whether Tathagata exists after death or not, is unanswerable because it's a wrongly framed question. It's not a question that can even heaven answer. It's kind of meaningless. And some questions are not answered because they're not of any value or fruit. And if one, like the beginning and ending of the universe, is in this category, because one can never be sure of knowing the answer and just fall into endless speculation about it, and it doesn't provide ever a conclusive answer or any kind of spiritual benefit. It's just like an endless rabbit hole that one can fall down with. Are there stages you go through as you gain right view, as your panya develops? Yeah, I think there is. That's what I mean by the view endlessly uh, becoming more refined. Um, so what I like to emphasize is you should never think that you know it all. You should always be open to new possibilities, new levels of understanding. You can understand things on different levels. It's kind of like a spiral. You keep going over the same ground, but at a higher level. So free will is more like the conditions of possibility in many ways. Therefore, it's never certain of any specific result. Um, yeah, I think you could put it that way. Uh, Also, to recall that Chaitanya itself, or will, is also conditioned. So it's free, but it's not entirely free. It's conditioned, so there's limitations to how far it can go. How do you know if you have wrong views or some subtle wrong views a typical layperson might have? Um, I think that the the best sort of touchstone is probably the three characteristics to look at. If you fall into believing that anything is either perfect and free of suffering, or if you believe in anything that's permanent and eternal, or if you see substantiality in things, then you know you're falling into the wrong view, and it can be very subtle, especially this not self, because it's essentially a denial of substantiality, and our mind tends to want to see things in terms of hard, uh, discrete substances. It's kind of the way the default way the mind wants to work, and it's sort of practical. It kind of works on a practical level, but it's not metaphysically correct. Yes, you can attain stream entry keeping the five precepts and seeing the three parts of existence. Yeah, that's a correct statement. Uh, is it possible for a layperson to do 1 to 3 solitary retreat on the center temple or monastery? No, that's definitely possible for lay people too. 1 to 3 months. That's definitely possible. I don't like here. I don't like to take someone on for a long retreat unless they've done shorter ones first. A complete beginner, I think they should do like 3 days. Would it be correct to say right view can only be superficial if not accompanied by strong samadhi? Yeah, I think that's probably true. Um, all the eightfold path factors, like right samadhi is one of the path factors. It's the last path factor, as right view is the first. It completes the path as right view initiates it. All the path factors have to really work together and deepen each other. Okay, I think we can maybe wrap it up for today. I want to just make a brief announcement, and I'm going to miss the live stream next week, but only next week. Then we'll carry on as usual. I'm going to be traveling, and I won't be possible for me to do a live stream next Thursday. So we're going to miss one, but I'll carry on after that. So thank you all for coming, and we'll see you in 2 weeks' time.